Good morning. Good morning. It's a beautiful morning. I'm Sissy Swig, and I have the honor of having been one of the presidents of the Jewish Community Federation, and I wanted to welcome everybody today for what I think we'll all agree will be a spectacular day and time well spent. And I have the pleasure and the honor of introducing Brian Lurie, who, as we probably all know, needs no introduction. However, there's something that occurs with experience and time when you need a formal introduction. Now, the most important thing I will tell you about Brian at this point is that he's just become a grandfather. The second most important thing is that when I first met him, I wasn't wearing glasses. And even though I don't really need a script to tell you about Brian, it's very nice to be able to honor all of the things that he has given to our community and really given to the world. Brian is going to introduce our first guest, who flew out here especially from Israel to be with us and to celebrate this centennial celebration. So we will have a wonderful opportunity to learn about the situation on the ground as it is rapidly changing. I've known Brian for so many years. I was just looking at my tag of 25 years of Federation. I think I knew him before that because he came out to be the assistant rabbi at Temple Emmanuel. And then shortly after that, he served at the Jewish Community Federation for the next 17 years. And under his leadership, truly, I think we'll all agree that the Federation expanded and grew to be a central address, if you will, that has enriched the Jewish community locally, nationally, and internationally. It was under his tenure that the Federation was expanded to include Marin County and the Peninsula. Brian also initiated and focused on the relationship that we had with the State of Israel to make sure that our community knew the people of Israel and communicated with individuals and communities in Israel and created our first office in the State of Israel. Brian was, as he reminded me, was responsible for many missions that went to Israel. One of them that I participated in that was considered a roots mission that I think for those of us who were able to go on that mission was a turning point in not only our careers in the Jewish community, but our thoughtful insight of what it is to be a Jew in this world today, and to be so proud of all of that. The other thing that Brian has done, when he left the Federation, he became the head of the United Jewish Appeal in New York, where he was for several years. And then when he returned, he became the president of the Contemporary Jewish Museum. And finally, something that he's constantly creating something, but finally he has been the co-creator of the interagency that dealing with Israeli Jews and Israeli Arab affairs in Israel. And he is also the vice president of the New Israel Fund. So without further ado, I would like to bring Brian up here so that you can congratulate him for all of his compliments as well.
Hi, everybody. First of all, I want to do something I haven't had an opportunity to do ever before. So I want to thank you, Sissy, because the Jewish Museum began in the Federation in the first level and the lower level, and it always had aspirations to be something more than that. And really, without Sissy Swig, the Contemporary Jewish Museum would not be here today. So thank you so much. Deputy Prime Minister of Israel, Dan Meridor. Now, there are things I didn't know about him till I went to Google, which is where we all have to go for anything important, I guess. First of all, I did know he was born in 1947 and is just a young guy, but I did not know he was a tank commander in the Six-Day War. And he rose to be a captain, and from there it was natural to go into politics. I mean, every war hero in Israel goes on and becomes a politician. But interestingly enough about Dan is at a very early age, late 30s, early 40s, he had the confidence of both Menachem Begin and Yitzhak Shamir, the prime ministers of Israel at their various times, to be their special liaison to America. Now, he eventually became ministers of both justice and finance, but it was that unique ability to be trusted by the leadership of Israel, which he obviously has become as well, but to relate on the most sensitive issues to the American leadership. Now, the wonderful thing about Dan is he just didn't work at that level, but he also had the ability to care about Jews living outside of Israel. And so a little bit later in his life, he headed a think tank that I was part of as well, a Diaspora Israel think tank, where he and others tried to work to help construct a constitution for the state of Israel. He brings an enormous sense of value and human response to every condition. And he really has a unique understanding of the American Jewish community. Now, I'm supposed to say something about why you're winning the award, but in a sense I have, Dan. The award, which is in my name, is really sort of meaningless. What's important is that you are here today as the representative, a leader of the state of Israel, to acknowledge the centennial of this federation which has done so much to reach out to Israel, to support Israel, and to create that kind of bond that we all work towards. So really, thank you so much for coming. You honor us by your presence, and we look forward to your remarks.
Good morning to all of you here. It is a pleasure to be here, although I don't know many people in this world could have schlepped me all the way from Israel, but Brian. He is unique, and I thank him for allowing me to be here and participate in that important event of celebrating the 100 years anniversary of this federation in San Francisco. You know, we all have our lives, but it's clear that all of us gathering here give high importance to being Jewish, whether we are in Israel or here. And in the world of today, the centrality of being Jewish in my life led me to understand the importance of the Israel-diaspora relationship for my country, for Israel, for the Jewish people, for all of us. And that is how Brian and I knew each other quite a number of years ago, and we keep on maintaining this contact between us. When he asked me to come, he asked that I speak on the everlasting, never-resolved conflict that we live through in the Middle East with the neighbors of ours. And little did I know that when I come here, there will be a mini war in Gaza and around Gaza. And I had to make a choice, which I made to come here in spite of it. And I must say that we had 2 years and more of calm. Deterrence did work. but to think of people who can target a school bus and hit it with precision-guided munition and wound severely a young guy who was there is something you don't think exists in this world. Mistakes occur, accidents occur, but to target a school bus from very close range, that you know what you're doing, this is part of the reality we have to live with. And interestingly, it is from Gaza. Gaza is a place where we left altogether 6 years ago in 2005 without asking anything in return, giving the Palestinians the first time in their history a way to rule themselves. And they went for elections. The Israeli government of the day, I was, by the way, out of politics for 6 happy years of my life, so I was not part of it. For some unclear reason, unclear to me and more so to my wife, I did return. But in those days, the Israeli government listened to the advice of the American government to let Hamas take part in the election. The result was, because we're all for democracy, that they won. So here's the paradox of democracy. What if the guys who win in democracy are bad guys? Guys who don't respect human rights, don't respect peace. What do you do with that? Where is democracy here? We may be witnessing something of the sort in the Middle East in these recent 2 months and in the coming months. I'll talk about this later. But be it what it may, I think that the Gaza exchange of fire is one other illustration of the volatility, the uncertainty that we have around us. Even if we are out of Gaza altogether, if there's no Israeli there, evicting 8,000 Israelis who live there, we still have to defend ourselves, which we did quite successfully, and we still are doing these very hours against the attack from Gaza. But let me take it somewhat broader than that. In recent 2 months or so, we see a surprising, meaningful change taking most of the Arab world. We live in an era of change. All of us know it. We don't always understand it, but the world is changing around us quite quickly. Technology is changing. The globalization is a new reality we live with. We see this, but this way or another, it was very strange that the only part of the world where there was no democracy at all was the Arab world. Not one Arab country that was democratic. The Soviet Union and its allies in the past succumbed to the pressure of democracy and the values of the West, the values of liberty, of democracy. South America, the dictatorships went through democracy. Even African countries tried democracy. In the Arab world, it never worked. So we see a change here. We see the beginning of a change, and we need to have an open mind to look at things and see what develops. And I do it as a spectator, but as a spectator who sits in the first row, not in the last row, because it touches me. It's just our neighbors. It's relevant to us, and I'll speak about this in a minute. We saw a very interesting phenomenon. We had revolutions in Arab countries in past years, but never a revolution like this. Usually there were slogans taken from the Islamic tradition, hatred slogans against the Jews, Itbach al-Yahud, kill the Jews, down with America. We saw it for many, many years. This time was very different. In the square in Cairo, Tahrir Square, Liberation Square, you heard slogans all taken from the Western vocabulary, nothing from the Muslim vocabulary. Democracy, freedom, liberty, end of corruption. Slogans we could identify with. Nothing against Israel, or almost nothing, or against the West. On the contrary, the terms, the values that they cherished and spoken of are Western values. Second, it was surprising. The image of the Arab who's a violent guy wasn't there. There was no violence in the Tahrir Square for 2.5 weeks. If there were violence, it wasn't the side of the government. So it looked as if, Mashiach is coming, and here something is happening that we never expected, and we looked at it quite surprised. I have to add here, in a diplomatic manner that I should adopt, that I was surprised not only at the events, I was not less surprised by the American reaction to the events, but I'll talk about this later in a polite way. Okay. The first lesson that I think we should have as human beings and as Israelis is humility. We don't know enough. Had you asked me a day before it happened, I would have told you it can never happen. Egypt was such a solid country, so steady, stable. The relationship with Israel was one of the cornerstones of the Middle East order, the Middle East peace, the Middle East stability. We had this regime in Egypt for decades. Mubarak, almost 30 years, Sadat before him, Nasser before them. We know what is Egypt. Our intelligence is quite good, I think. So is the American or the British. We didn't know. They didn't know. Moreover, Mubarak didn't know. So something is happening here that is not usual. So the beginning was seemed full of hope. They got rid of President Mubarak. But where does it go? Do we know where it goes? We don't. In old times, the revolution came from a group of officers, from a party, from a sect of people. Here it came from simple people in the street, educated people who might have understood these values they're speaking of, and they started it. So it looks good, but where is it going? Who is going to take advantage of it? We don't know. We saw these things happening in Tunisia. We saw them happening now in Yemen, not clear where it's going to end there. We saw them in Syria. In an interesting way, I remember when the Egyptian turmoil was there, I heard the American administration saying very clearly, you need to leave now. The word now emphasized again and again. I didn't hear the same word uttered against President Assad when he started in Syria for some reason, maybe because Mubarak was a friend. But this was something that is worthwhile thinking of. Where will it go in Libya? Somebody joking said to me that as it may be split in the end between the pro-Gaddafi and against Gaddafi forces, maybe this is the place where you'll have the first success of the two-state solution, 2 states of Libya. So we don't know about that, but what I'm saying in a humoristic way is that it looks interesting, promising, threatening, but we don't know where it's going to go. It's not clear, not at all. You know, in Tehran, in Iran, 31, 32 years ago, it started with the same slogans, it ended up with God coming in with his people, and they, of course, know better, and the result is what we see. I'm not sure it's the same thing here, but it's widely open. So far, interestingly, we were not accused, with some exceptions. Assad did say that it's all America and Israel, but in Egypt you didn't hear that the Israelis are to blame, or the Jews are to blame. Not in Tunisia, not in Yemen. We're not yet there in our traditional role of scapegoats, a role which we might assume in the future when these revolutions that always raise high expectations do not meet the expectations, then you need some scapegoat. So we are waiting to see if we are called to play this role, but it's not yet there. And that's interesting as well, maybe because people will not buy it anymore, because they know what the regimes that they live with are. Maybe, but this too is still to be seen. From our perspective, Egypt and Israel, as I said, this was the cornerstone of stability and peace in the Middle East for over 3 decades. If I look at the history of our country, 63 years now, this coming May, the one most important, single most important political, diplomatic act of Israel was the Begin-Sadat peace treaty with Egypt. Nothing was more decisive, was more important in being really a turning point for the better in the Middle East. we were able to tear out on this wall of animosity and hatred around us the main bloc, the strongest Arab country, Egypt, in formal peace with us. It did tear apart the Arab unanimity against us. It made almost impossible a whole Arab war against Israel. It changed the Middle East in many ways, and it opened the door for others to follow. Years later, Prime Minister Rabin and King Hussein of Jordan, 94, signed the treaty of peace between Israel and Jordan. In the meantime, we had negotiations with other Arabs. There was the Oslo Agreement of 93. I didn't think it was a great thing, but basically it was in the same direction of accepting us the Middle East. We had relationship developing with North African countries like Morocco and Tunisia. We had a good relationship under the table with some Gulf states. You saw a trend that was quite good in the Middle East. It was taking too long. It was heartbreaking, nerve-breaking. It never went the smooth way, but it was important. It didn't stem from them thinking that Zionism is a great idea, but because they understood what the Germans used to call realpolitik, they understood that Israel is a strong enough country and they cannot get rid of it, so let's live with it. It was a very important positive development, but all of it was based on the Israeli-Egyptian peace treaty. Egypt was the leader of the Arab world. The Arab League sits in Cairo. Now, with Egypt weakening, where will all this go? I just heard or saw on the net when I came here, Amr Moussa, who is the Secretary General of the Arab League and an Egyptian leader who wants to run for president, asking the United Nations to impose a no-fly zone over Gaza against Israel like they did on Gaddafi. If that's the new tone that we hear from Egypt, it's not a very positive tone. So far we are getting remarks and the communication from Egypt that say we are not going to change the policy of maintaining peace with Israel. It's very important, and I hope they will keep it. They don't do it for us. They do it as well for them. I think it's their interest, not less than us, and I hope it will continue. It is important. What does this do to the Palestinian-Israeli dialogue? There is a clear connection. The Palestinians are split between Hamas and Fatah, or the PLO. It's a historic split. Again, I'll speak of this some minutes later when I speak about Iran. The introduction of religion to put to the political conflict, to add the layer of religious belief, religious conviction, religious grounds for the conflict. You see all over the Arab world, religious-based organizations, not national-based organizations. In the Palestinian camp, you see the PLO, which is a national movement. We don't particularly like them, but they are a national movement. And Hamas, which is a religious movement. And there's a big fight between them, not on Gaza. Gaza is a minor thing. Of course, they have control over Gaza. On the representation of the Palestinian cause, who has the right to speak for the Palestinian people? Is it the PLO? This is the main raison d'etre of the PLO, or is it Hamas? Now, Hamas and the PLO were supported. Hamas was and is supported by Syria and Iran. The PLO was mainly supported by Egypt, President Mubarak in particular. Egypt weakened. Syria still thinking they're having the upper hand. What does it do to the intra-Palestinian relationship? Does it weaken the PLO to a point where they cannot make decisions, which they were not very good at anyway? A question that needs to be asked, and I think that the Palestinians are quite concerned with what happened in the Arab world. The balance of power within the Arab world shifted because Egypt was weakened, and we don't know how it's going to end. No doubt that Egypt has already allowed the Muslim Brotherhood movement, not officially, but in fact to take part in the election. This was a movement that was banned under Mubarak and Sadat for many years and Nasser, and this movement is a sister movement of Hamas. Hamas people were already meeting the leadership in Cairo. So in the intra-relationship of the Palestinian camp, the decline of Egypt, if that's the case in the end, is not good for our relationship with the Palestinians, because no doubt that the strength of Hamas goes against any agreement with Israel. This is, I think, obvious. One doesn't need to speak of that. In any case, if there's agreement with the Palestinians in the future, it would take very courageous leadership. Can I put it in plural? Leaderships in Israel and the Palestinian camp to take tough decisions. Tough, I mean those that are not popular. Popular decisions are easy to take. That's not a big thing. The thing is to take decisions that you think are right, but your people are not particularly in favor of it. Begin took such a decision in 1977. I'm sure that had he gone to a referendum in Israel asking, should I give all of Sinai to the last inch and give up my belief, long life belief of implying our sovereignty to Judea and Samaria and offer autonomy instead, I don't think he would have the support of the people. Even the Labour Party, most of it, would not have voted for it. They were for taking some of the part of Sinai. Had Sadat gone to the people of Egypt asking them, would you be ready to make peace with Israel and legitimize Israel in a way? I'm not sure what the results would have been. But it took two leaders of that caliber to make a historic decision, after which most people, of course, followed. Now, is the Palestinian leadership, and I can't speak about the Israeli because we are, of course, perfect, the Palestinian leadership is a leadership that is weak anyway. Will this make them stronger or weaker? I leave the question unanswered, but I think the answer may not be definitely in the positive. And this is the leadership that was offered by Ehud Olmert, the previous prime minister, a far-reaching compromise, the most extreme, if you like, offering, in fact, 100% of the land with some 6% swap to a Palestinian state. Even ideas were raised that I never believed would be raised, like internationalizing the old city of Jerusalem. Even this was not responded to, was not reacted to positively. As Olmert recounts it, Abu Mazen said, let me think of it, I'll take it to my advisors, and he never came back with an answer. Is he now ready to do it or not? A question that needs to be answered somehow. We don't know where it is. But the tendency that some of us have, and here I have to do it cautiously because I represent the whole government of Israel, the tendency not to do anything that was there with some people anyway, gets of course stronger when there's an earthquake, metaphorically. Well, after Japan, you didn't say it, but with the turmoil all over the Arab world. You don't know what tomorrow will bring. You make an agreement with a guy, tomorrow morning Hamas takes over. It's popular, so the Americans will say, yes, let the democracy work, and what do you do next? It's not an easy question. I'm not saying that it's easy to act now, but I think we live in an anomaly for 40-something years since the 6 Days War that cannot continue indefinitely. In the last 2 years and more, there was a change in the Palestinian strategy. Part of it is very positive, part of it is less positive, even negative. The positive part is, first, there's no terror. Now, this sounds normal in the street of San Francisco. It was not the case in the streets of Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. Being a Jerusalemite, can tell you the stories you might have seen on the screen here. Buses exploding near my home, cafes exploding. This is what we saw. For the last 2 years and more, there is no terror, practically none. Why? Yes, because of our army, our security services, but also because of their decision not to allow terror and to cooperate with us against terror. This is a strategic decision by Abu Mazen and his people. In fact, we together fight a common enemy called Hamas. We change the reality on the ground. A second element in the change strategy is that they build up a state from bottom up. They say they take the Ben Gurion historic example of what we call in Hebrew Medina Shebaderech, a state in making, and we prepare all the institutions that once there will be, it will be possible, we'll have everything in place. And it worked quite well with Fayyad, who is a positive man, and there's much more law and order in the Palestinian territories now. As I said, no terror. Economic growth is quite impressive. They had 8 or 9% growth last year. They expect more even this year. I hear from people who visit there that you see much more employment, projects on the ground, not only in Ramallah, where you have a new elite emerging, not basically from Fatah, by the way, civilian people, and there is a change, which is positive. The third element of the new strategy is not that positive. They don't want to negotiate. They don't say it, but I read it clearly. They want agreement to be imposed on Israel, or maybe Israel and them. Is it the lack of courage or political strength to make a decision? I don't know. Is it because Hamas is there that doesn't let them make a decision? or else they will be, if they do it, they are traitors and whatnot. The fact is that they devised a plan by which the world, state by state, will accept the Palestinian state, decide the borders, and they will have to sit there on the sidewalk, not join the march, and see what happens. They aim at September coming. September is the General Assembly, UN General Assembly reconvening like every year, and they want to pass a resolution there in the General Assembly recognizing state, including the idea of the 67 borders. Now, I have to say a state for Palestine is part of the solution. Not only their idea, but our idea. Prime Minister Netanyahu, as you know, is I think the third or fourth Prime Minister of Likud after Sharon and Olmert, who came from the same school, is saying two-state solution. He said so openly in the well-known Bar Ilan speech he made over a year and a half ago. We have questions about the exact borders and security and Jerusalem and refugees, but the idea, the paradigm of two states is the solution. But about the borders, when one says 67 is the borders, and one should not build across the 67, one says, in fact, Jews cannot build in the Jewish quarter of Jerusalem. The Wailing Wall is not part of Israel, it's part of Palestine. This is totally unacceptable to us. We'll never accept it. In fact, the world understood it so far. And the President of the United States, President Bush, even wrote a letter to Prime Minister Sharon saying the border will not be 67, it will include the demographic changes, including the population centers, what we call settlement blocks. And of course, Jerusalem will not again be all of it along the 67 lines. But this is where they're heading, and it creates a problem for us, and we are fighting that diplomatic war, so to speak. Come September, we'll see what happens. I have to tell you that within our government, there are different views about what one should do. I'm of the one of those ministers who think that we should have our own initiative. Maybe we can't have a full agreement, maybe yes, I cannot say, but the fact that worldwide we are to blame is not good. And we need to show that it's our interest to have a Palestinian state near us, provided that our security is kept and the other issues resolved, including Jerusalem borders. And above all, refugees. I would say a word about this. People don't understand sometimes the importance of this issue. Two-state solution is agreed by everybody, including Hamas. What they don't agree is that this is the end of the conflict. And after this, there are no more claims, no more war, no more fight. Because you may remember the PLO was not established after 67. It was established before, to get rid of the very idea of a Jewish state in this part of the world. The one item, which is the litmus test, is the refugees issue. Once you have a state, you Palestinians, will you still demand to have a right to move to Israel? What they call the right of return. If that's the case, we have no agreement. And they don't say it. And the world that wants to help doesn't pressure them on this. Doesn't put the right pressure to make sure that we know we go for the end of the story, the end of the conflict, not just another stage in an ongoing conflict. I spoke about the Palestinian issue. I'll leave it as it is. I think we should take initiative. Other ministers have different views. We'll see what happens. Prime Minister promised a speech on that issue quite soon. We'll see. Let me not skip one issue that I've never mentioned so far. It is Iran. It was overshadowed by the events in the Arab world. But this is, if you ask me, what is the theater you need to buy tickets to in the Middle East or in the world? It's the Iran-America issue on the nuclearization of Iran. Even the end of this conflict, that America is now leading against Iran. America and its allies in the West, Russia and others. Iran does get nuclear. This will have grave ramification. We'll have a new ballgame altogether, not only in the Arab-Israeli conflict, it will have a major impact on the standing of the United States in the world. If Iran gets nuclear, Egypt says, we Egyptians get nuclear. Saudis may do the same. You see more and more countries getting nuclear because they don't want to see the hegemony of Iran through nuclear Iran. If Iran gets nuclear and hegemonic, some countries who now want to go against Iran with America will say, well, that's the case, we need to join. Think of the Middle East and the Gulf area and the oil area under such a heavy domination of Iran. And there is this element that I spoke of religion earlier. All over the Muslim world, you see this new phenomenon. I call it in a word that I shouldn't say because it's politically very dangerous, call it the return of God into politics, which is quite alarming to me. You see it, organizations that you have heard of, like Al-Qaeda, or Jihad, or Hamas, or Hezbollah, or Taliban. All are not nationally based, but basically religiously based. Some of them cross borders. They all have something all of us don't have. They have a direct line to God. They know exactly what He wants. They act for Him. Now, you know, when we have difficulties and conflicts and problems, we can compromise. God's never compromise. Jewish God, Christian God, Muslim God, God is truth. God is justice. God is something that you don't compromise on. And this is the new introduction of this element of religion into the conflict that was led by Iran and then followed by Hezbollah and Hamas. For them, it's not a political issue. It's against the religious understanding or religious belief, or if you like, the mitzvah, the commandment of religion, that there shouldn't be a non-Muslim state here. This is not for compromise. This is a bad development. And for the victory of Iran over the United States in that test of the nuclear program of Iran will be seen by all these groups all over the Muslim world as a big victory against the powers of the West and a proof that you can do it. You can stand up and do it. So for me, it's one of the most important elements, most important developments of the world. We need to see whatever we can do to stop this process of Iran getting nuclear, because Iran nuclear is not United Nations, United States being nuclear, or Britain or France. It's a country that has an ideology of exporting the revolution officially. They want to export it to all the Arab and Muslim world, where the religion is not that much observed, especially not in the leadership. It's a country that uses terror. And not only it's against its own people, but Hezbollah, Hamas, and other organizations, other parts of the Arab world. And I think this development of the Iranian history in recent years needs to be stopped, or else we have a different world altogether. And I didn't mention Israel in all this context, because, of course, they speak of us in very simple terms. We shouldn't exist. We are against the law of religion, and in the end, we will not exist. So, of course, we have an interest. I don't hide it. But nobody will or should fight for us. Nobody ever did. Nobody ever will. But if it's the interest of the other parts of the world, I don't speak of going to war. It's not my business to advise other people. But to continue with the sanction regime, I think, is a must. And I have to say something that not everybody accepts. I think that it can work. Iran is not North Korea. It's not an isolated state. It's not autarky. They need the world. They need the financial system of the world. They need the banking system of the world. They need to take off and land. They are a country that was a secular country until this revolution of 30 years ago, and they need to be part of the world. So the sanctions that have been started by the UN, by the EU, by the American Congress, if they are persistent, if there's leadership saying to them clearly, you are not going to get nuclear, we are serious about this, and the sanctions are tightened every week or month in the coming months, and they start feeling it, and I think they feel it by now, there may be a way that they will step down from where they are now. It's very, very important. Now, this is the world I see, the good guys that were moving towards more peace and acceptance of Israel and stability, like Egypt, Jordan, Morocco, some Gulf states, even Tunisia, now are somewhat shaken. We need to see as much as we can. We have a limited contribution here, but as much as we can to see that this camp stays strong. It is, in fact, the Western camp. And we do see that the bad guys don't win this battle. Bad guys, I mean Iran and what comes with Iran, Hezbollah and Hamas and the rest of them. And of course, we have a role to play, and I said something about what I think we should do. I'm speaking here, and I'm speaking in the diaspora, in America, in San Francisco. Why do I say all of this to you? Because I do think that not only you being here that are interested, of course, but I think it goes deeper and broader than that. You know, in Jewish history, for many, many generations, there's a book of Jewish history of many, many sad and tragic chapters that we can read, all of us. In our history of thousands of years, especially 2,000 years since the exile of the first century. The new chapter that we live is a chapter that we are writing, not only reading. This is a new addition to Jewish history that Zionism brought in. We are writing the chapter our own way. And 63 years of Israel, I think, is a proof, for all of you who know it, of, in a way, a miracle come true, a success story unprecedented to me, not just because of our military strength. Look at the high tech, the startups, look at the economy that is doing even better than some great friends of ours, and look at the science, and look at the culture, and look at the Hebrew. It's a great success story. So we are doing it there, but those of us in the Jewish world who care about this as a major project in their life and do not live there can take part by participating, by contributing, by helping, by sending the kids to Israel via birthright, by being part of that project. And this is something that can be done even from here, from San Francisco. Let me pause here, and now the questions, please.
Thank you so much, Mr. Minister. You received cards when you came in. If you will write your questions on the cards and pass them to the end, to the aisle, we'll bring them up, and as many as we can, we'll answer. All right? If any of you have cards right now, if you just raise your hands. Okay.
Is it work? Okay. I don't think it is working. These mics, can we get them on? On now. First of all, as he's standing right now, Akiva Tor, Israeli Consulate of Israel, Consul General of Israel. Akiva deserves big applause because not only is he a good Consul General, he's outstanding, and he's made a real difference in our community. Thank you. I'm going to turn first to questions that are domestic in nature. We've heard the outside. Now I want to go inside. And I want to go inside with, this is a one-vote deal. So I want to go inside to a person that I only wish were the Prime Minister of Israel.
Don't do that to me, you'll kill me now.
I only wish. But his 6 grandchildren are so happy that he's not, because he has time for them and his 4 children, or 8 children. Going inside, the big problem at one time in Israel was Fardim Ashkenazim. That was considered to be, how are they ever going to be able to relate? And then you had, of course, the secular religious question. What do you think today is the major internal issue that must be resolved in order for Israel to go forward?
The Ashkenazi-Sephardi division, I think, in fact, doesn't exist anymore in any meaningful way. It's a big success story again. For me, it's natural. I never saw a problem in it. But for some people, by the way, from both sides, there were problems of marrying the other side and so forth. It's a thing of the past. I remember one day in Mexico City, I went to visit the community there. And I met the heads of the community. There are 50,000 people, 90-something% of the children go to Jewish school speaking Hebrew, some speaking Yiddish in a way. And the head of the community, a man from Syria, from Haleb, from Aleppo, and I asked him whether they have mixed marriages. He said, yes, some of our daughters marry Ashkenazim, which was tough for him. So this is the idea. We don't have this problem anymore, I think, and I don't want to even to give you names of people of Sfaradim, Ashkenazim, the highest posts in the country. I don't think there's any problem there. Religious secular is not that simple, I have to say, but I don't want to go into it. In the religious camp, there's a big movement, change. The idea that was led by the National Religious Party, Mafdal, to combine modernity and religion might not have worked well politically. Many people in their camp become more Haredi, more observant, more strict, and some of them go secular. And this is a question that needs to be resolved. I don't want to go into it. It's a big one. If you want, I'll come to it later. The Arab-Israeli conflict, the Jewish-Arab conflict inside Israel is an important issue. And I think it needs to be taken care of with much more care than until now. I'm afraid that you can explain it because of the conflict continues, because of some political developments in Israel. In recent years, we have made mistakes, I think. We are a state that was established by the Jews for the Jewish people, definitely. This is Zionism. But we always knew there is an Arab minority. There are about 20% of us for many years. And the idea that we have a state for all of us, in which all of us are equal, Jews and Arabs, is to me a moral test and a pragmatical test. And in recent years, there was a tendency by some parts of the Israeli body politic and popular movements to stress 10 times a day that we are a Jewish state, that everybody should say before he does something, I accept that you're a Jewish state. When you do it to the Arabs, you do something wrong morally and wrong practically. Of course we are a Jewish state, but what does it mean? That the Arabs are not equal citizens? Does it mean that they are not like me exactly in everything? I think it's wrong. And I think that we, and I don't speak of security. The security problems, I need to be tough on this, I can't give up on this. But there are certain new winds that blow and that I don't like, and some of us are fighting it quite tough. I'm joined in this in the Likud by Minister Benny Begin and the Speaker of the Knesset Rivlin and Minister Eitan and some others. It's a trend that I don't like. I understand where it comes from, but I think it's bad, and this is something we need to take into account, looking on Jewish history, on our moral basis, and on practical terms. Most of the Arabs in Israel want to stay Israelis and abide by the law. Very few of them would cross the lines of the law, and the very few of them, there are in some numbers, even growing, would go to the extreme Islamic movements, like all of them, Muslim communities around the world, like the Islamic movement in Israel, and some of them go very extreme on the national basis. But they are the extremes, the margins. They are not the main Arab society, and it's up to us to help most of them stay and feel at home with us and not feel alienated by us.
This federation has been a leader in trying to help the Israeli Arab reach the status of equality inside of Israel, Dan.
Okay, you're doing a great thing by this.
But and I know where you stand, which is that you're opposed to so many of these measures that are presently before the Knesset. They're, by Arik Carmon, our mutual friend, he estimates his IDI Institute that there are at least 21 anti-democratic measures before the Knesset, or have been before the Knesset. Now, that's the business of Israel, but obviously it plays into one of the great strengths of Israel, because democracy is a key, that along with it being a Jewish state. Is there anything that we can do? Is there anything that, I know you've tried to do and spoken out against many of these laws, but maybe speak a little bit about that.
I have to say, in spite of the intimacy I feel here, I am not in the habit of asking people, even good friends in the Jewish world, to intervene inside Israeli politics. It's for us to make a decision. We will take every advice, because you may not be shareholders in Israel, but you have options to become shareholders. So you are part of us. To take this metaphor, all of you who can become a shareholder, like the Israeli Arabs, by the way. We are a nation that has 80% Jews, 20% Arabs, and it's fine. We can do with that. We can prove to the world that what we demand as Jews in diaspora, we give to the minorities among us when we are the majority. This is a big test. And again, I leave security aside. It needs to be taken care of. I don't play it down. So I don't want to ask you to intervene. I think we need to speak of it. And when you say democracy, we need to define democracy. Unfortunately, even in some parts of America, looking at the Middle East policy, they equate democracy with election or majority rule. Of course, it's a necessary element. Without majority rule in the election, you don't have democracy, but it's not sufficient. Most dictators have majority for them. Hitler had majority, Stalin had majority, no doubt. I'm not sure, by the way, Mubarak hadn't a majority, had it been asked. People in the square, 500,000, didn't want him. The 83 million Egyptians were not asked, so I don't know what the majority would have said. But majority to me is first democracy to me is first what the majority cannot do to me. What you would call inalienable rights that cannot be taken away. First Amendment rights in your area. The majority cannot enact against me, although they have the majority. So when you speak of democracy, explaining what democracy, it doesn't start with majority. Why do we speak of majority? Because everybody counts. Why? Because everybody is equal. It starts with equality. Without equality, majority, that means nothing. So to speak about the essence of democracy in terms of the individual rights, of human rights, of process of democracy is important. But this we can do together. I think even some Americans can learn here, not only Israelis.
We have obviously a bunch of different questions coming from the audience. Excuse me. Can Abu Mazen make peace without Hamas, without Gaza?
Abu Mazen definitely cannot make peace with Hamas and with Israel together. So it's easier for me to answer the question you didn't ask, but is underlying assumption there, that there is an option of making peace with Hamas. Hamas, not because I like them or don't, I'm not exactly a fan of the PLO either, but Hamas says Israel is not legitimate, will never recognize it because it's against religion's concept of what we believe, will never respect the agreement signed, namely the Oslo Agreement, and we will never give up on violence. So if these three no's are there, what sort of agreement can we have with them? I have no particular love for the Fatah, and I don't think, but these are people who say, at least say, that they are ready to live in peace with us. Questions to be resolved that I mentioned, that the refugees and other questions, the Jerusalem borders, all important. But basically they say we are ready to go for peace. Hamas says never. In a way, Hamas says we are ready to make some armistice with you, some ceasefire, but when we are strong enough, we'll continue the struggle. So in a strange way, the people who don't want any agreement would like Hamas to be leading the Palestinian camp, because then there's no chance of putting an end to the conflict, as far as I can see. What if Hamas changes? If tomorrow morning they will say, we accept Israel, we recognize Israel, we'll refrain from violence, and we respect the agreements, then it's not Hamas, it's something else. So far, Hamas is part of a, as I said earlier, you see all over the Muslim world, what I call the return of God, which is a popular way to say it, going back to religion as a guiding force in politics. This Hamas is part of that movement that you see all over the Muslim world. In every Muslim society you see this. This may not be the majority, but Hamas is that. It's not good. So I think that Abu Mazen has to face the very cruel choice of his life. He has gone to a point, he has come to a point with Olmert 2.5 or 3 years ago in November of 2008, where he was offered everything that we thought he was going for. He was fighting for all his life. He got a Palestinian state, the end of occupation, even something neutral about Jerusalem, which I wouldn't have offered, but was offered by Olmert. Everything was there, but one thing. He needed to say that's the end of the conflict. If he doesn't have the courage to say it, they won't have a state. Even if the UN decide, even if we are ostracized in the nations and they say that we are bad, it may happen, and I think we should take some action. I'm not an observer here. I'm a player and I want to play it right. But they can't have it without making some leadership decisions that were made in the Israeli case by Ben-Gurion and the leadership in 47, 48. If they will not have the courage to make decisions of what they are ready to give up on, not what they want, what about the easy. They won't have a solution to their problem. So it's up to him, he's the leader now, to make this. I'm not one of those who say definitely he will never make it. But this is the decision, it's tough, but it's all his.
Question from the audience. Why does the Israeli government persist on building settlements?
Across what I would call the blocks line, the settlement blocks line or the fence line. If we are serious when we say Palestinian state as a neighbor, to me it doesn't stand to logic to build in the places that are destined for a Palestinian state. But at the same token, not to build in Ma'ale Domim or in Gush Etzion or in East Jerusalem says that we are giving up on this, and we are not going to give up on this. It was, I think, clear to all people interested and who understand something, including the American administration, including the Palestinian leadership, that there is going to be inclusion in Israel of the settlement blocks, at least some of them, not everything is agreed. The idea that the border should not be 67, which, by the way, has never been an official border, there has never been a Palestine. It was occupied by Jordan for 19 years and by us for 44 years. But there was no state there that we need to go back to. We need to define a line. So I think it will be wrong not to build. Some of you know Jerusalem quite well. go to Ramat Eshkol in Jerusalem, tell the people you can build up to number 48, not to number 50, because this was Palestine, this was Jordan. You think they're crazy. What are you speaking of? In the middle of the street, you stop building. Not to build in Givat Tzorfatit, in Gilo, it's crazy. So I think we should not stop building altogether, but there should be a logic of where we build. And I think we should not build across the lines that are destined by us to become a Palestinian state, and we should go on building where we think should be part of Israel. This is my idea. Other Israelis, including in the government, say we should not stop building because this is, you give up before you get anything, and I don't want to go into all this. But let me make it clear that it's not a government policy, it's my openly stated proposals to the government, not only mine, but mine also.
When Dan and I were sitting down here, he said, let's not talk about Israel and diaspora and Jews, let's talk about being a grandparent. As I said, Dan has 6 grandchildren, the oldest is 8. I just have a week-old one, so I'm really a novice. But I bring it up for really a simple reason. We, Jews here and Jews in Israel, relate on a very, very family-type basis. I mean, we are a Jewish people. And the relationship that I have with Dan, and I've had for almost 30 years now, is one of somebody that I care about,
years,
and
since you were
vice
20.
versa.
Since you were 20, 30 years.
30 years.
Yeah.
So in the book of Genesis, Noah, there is a statement, Hu Tzaddik B'dorotav, he was a righteous man in his generation. Dan, thank you for coming. Thank you for being with us, and God bless.